Welcome back to the channel. Today is pretty much day 3 on this thing. The 3.4 is sitting there in there mounted. So we are going to try to get the drivetrain finished up and mounted, and then that way we can start prepping for the 3-leg. This is, I talked about it before briefly, but it's a AX15 hybrid. So it has the R150 bell housing, which is what bolts up to the 3.4. And the nice part about this setup is you have your 6-bolt pattern for the rear instead of using an adapter to run to anything off of the R150. Plus, it's a little bit shorter than the R150, which is nice in a lot of different situations. So we'll pull the shifter off of that and we'll get that into the truck and mount the transfer case to it. And this will help us figure out in the truck where we need to clock everything so that we can set the clocking ring and then make mounts. So start out with the transmission, and then we'll go through the transfer case. All right, so this transfer case is a Apex from Behemoth with 4-to-1s in it, 32 spline outputs and the like. Same setup I'm running in mine. It looks like he's got everything set up for 23 spline, which is the same as well. So this is the transfer case going to be using in this. And then that will allow it to do front dig separately, front wheel drive separately and whatnot, which will be pretty cool. So we'll get the transmission in and we'll start figuring this guy out. All right, I just took the jack stands out that were holding up the engine from tilting. So right now it's actually just on the mounts that are tacked in. That way we can throw it on the lift so I don't have to lay on the ground and do the transmission. So it's looking pretty level right now. Obviously front suspension is going to change anyways, and we will get a weight once it's all together, and that way we'll know what spring rates to run. So let's get this thing up in the air, get the transmission in. All right, we got the transmission mounted in. Looks like the shifter is gonna have to be bent. It's right at the front of the old shifter hole. So the transmission is just a little bit shorter. So we're gonna have to make a bend in it to get it out where we want it to. Now we gotta figure out the transfer case setup, see exactly how we're gonna clock that to make everything clear, and then we can set it up. All right, so with the transmission output setup, that has to have a spacer on it, but this transfer case also has the same holes, so you can clock it whatever way you want. With this adapter, right now it's not sealed or anything because it's loose, depending on if we need to move it. So let's get it up in there with these studs and see where it's gonna end up. All right, so this is where it ended up mounting to clear. Hangs really low. That's not gonna work. So what we're gonna end up doing is the floor has already been cut, and the inside of this truck has like a mat that was glued down. So we're gonna end up tearing up the mat anyways to look at the floor, because obviously we want to make sure this is solid anyways. So looks like we're gonna be cutting the floor and get this thing up a little bit. If we can get it up at least a few more degrees, get it a little bit more level, because right now it hangs still like 6 inches. We don't want that. So it's gonna be fun. Cut the floor. All right, so this is the floor that's in here. We're going to pull all that out. So now we can go from the bottom side, do a couple measurements, which we already have it kind of marked out. And there's nothing in here, so I'll drill a couple holes in the corners so that way I can see where I need to cut to and see how it's gonna work. All right, so the main reason that we can't go any higher is because the shifters are pretty much touching right now, which obviously won't work. So we're going to just drill right to here. We can go farther if we need to, but we're gonna start the cut as close as we can, see if we can get it tilted up just a little bit more. If that's the case, then we don't need to cut any farther, but we can always cut farther if need be. All right, we should be able to see those two holes inside, and then we're gonna lower this transfer case down so that we have room to cut. All right, so real quick before we just send it with the cuts, we're gonna remove this shifter panel. That's gonna have to all be redone anyways. So we'll pull that real quick, and that way we can just cut this. All right, so now we have tons of space. So let's cut this back out and see if we can rotate it one stud and see where that puts us. All right, so that's a lot better angle wise. We were 6.5 inches, 6 inches below the frame. Now we're 3. A lot better. The link mounts and everything are going to go in this general area anyways, so we can make pretty much a skid plate straight across, and it will be really like it won't really be hanging down. So that should be perfect. We're up inside of the hole I cut all the way, so we're probably gonna have to cut this a little bit more. That way the transfer case can go in and out. Plus we have to make shifters, which this setup's going to be cable shifters, so it's going to be pretty easy, but we don't want them to go outside of the tunnel into the cab. We want them to go route together underneath. So going to be fun making that all look clean, but that's a lot better location. All right, so these are the mounts that I mounted my transfer case with. I'm going to change this one up just a little bit, but the rest of these I can leave the same because it's the same case. So I'm gonna cut this one out and then get the rest cut out on the appropriate size metal and modify that one real quick. So with the transfer case being where it's at without a doubler, the link mounts are going to end up lining up very close. So there's a possibility that I can integrate the entire transfer case mount setup with the links, which would be awesome. So I'm probably just gonna have to temporary mount it real quick, get it just tacked in so that I can use the jack stands under the axle and then start doing that process. So that's probably what's gonna happen, is make a temporary mount and then come back to it. Well, the drivetrain is mounted. Obviously, like I said, this is all temporary, so I didn't even plate it or anything. I just welded a tube in, put a couple tabs in, so that way it would hold it in place. So now, since I want to make all that work together, I'm going to start working on stripping the front end out. Get this thing ready for the relink and new axles. All right, we still got it on the lift, but the front axle is just slightly touching the ground. So now we can pull the entire suspension out and start cutting. All right, we got the front axle and suspension out, so all we have left on this side is the shock mounts, shackle mounts back here, and the steering box we have to pull off to remove that, and then the front mounts, which most likely is going to end up, the front of the frame's here, so we're most likely just going to cut all this off and rebuild a new front bumper. But we'll see that when the time comes, depending on how far we can get the box forward, because the track bar needs to go in here somewhere so it clears the motor. Otherwise we gotta bend it like crazy, and rather not do that if we don't have to. So, time to get it cut and strip this thing down. Alright, we got the frame all the way stripped down, all the leaf spring mounts off on both sides. So now it's time to start mocking up the front axle and the 3-link.